now we're going to discuss another very interesting development, how a research institute, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, has released a report saying how global arms sales have gone up by 5%. Let's speak to somebody from this institute. We have with us online Mr. Siemon Wezeman. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon.
Yes, good evening.
So can you please tell us a little bit about this report of yours? This is now a market that we're seeing is dominated by the United States. 59% of all arms sales are from the United States. Where exactly are these arms going?
So what we're looking at is the largest companies and their arms sales. And yes, 59% of that, of those companies, of those sales are in the U.S. So U.S. companies doing it. Most of those sales are actually to the U.S. U.S. companies are not extremely big exporters as part of their total sales. They're big exporters, but as part of their total sales, it's not so terribly important. So it's for the U.S. market is the main one. Of course, there are some important export markets from where U.S. companies profit. Then you get European companies which have a slightly different profile. The European market is large, but European companies generally generate more of their revenue outside of their own country than U.S. companies. So they are more dependent on exports.
Okay. So for the US, you're saying that it's mostly internal sales within the country, and for for Europe, it's also exports. And
Yes,
also,
exactly.
the data for China is not exactly clear, because the top producers are the USA, followed by Russia, which is 8.6%, United Kingdom 8.4%, and France 5.5%. So what would the data look like for China?
Well, we don't include the Chinese companies because we just don't have enough information from them. Some companies just don't provide any information about their arms sales, and others give ad hoc information, so we don't have a sequence of years to look at. But from the indications that we see, and just also knowing that the Chinese defense budget is very high and mostly it's spent on Chinese weapons, several Chinese companies will belong to the top 100, some actually really high up. Companies like AVIC, the aircraft company, would probably be somewhere in the top 10. Just knowing what they produce, the number of aircraft they churn out, they would certainly belong there. But we just don't know the exact figures.
Right, okay. And from your research, which country is the one that's importing the highest number of arms?
Well, that's a different set of data, but looking at imports, it's Saudi Arabia and India are at this moment the biggest importers of weapons. Saudi Arabia, big appetite for weapons and no arms industry to speak of. And India, also a big appetite for weapons. It has an arms industry. As you noted in the information we provided, there are 3 Indian companies in the top 100, but the arms industry is by far not capable enough to produce for the demands of the Indian armed forces.
Right. Okay, and this increase in sales that we're seeing of arms, now where do these arms mostly end up? Is this in conflict zones, or is there any watchdog for this? Where are these arms ending up, and what are they being used for?
There is no real official watchdog or so. As I said, the U.S. is buying mostly for its own armed forces, so the sales are mostly to the U.S. But of course, the U.S. uses those weapons in different places in the world, also in conflict, in Syria, for example, in Afghanistan. European companies a bit less, albeit some of their weapons are being used in Syria and Afghanistan. And the weapons that they sell to other countries are heavily used in several conflicts or in areas where there are high tensions. Middle East, several places in Asia, where big arms importers buy from European countries, buy from the US, buy from Russia. Those weapons are there, and yes, they do to some extent fuel the conflict, fuel the tensions. Doesn't make it better. The world hasn't become safer in the last years. You see that from the arms, from the military spending, which is increasing basically everywhere in the world. You see it from the number of conflicts that are going on, and you see it also from arms sales and arms imports, all increasing and clearly indicating that the world hasn't become safer.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us online, Mr. Siemon Wezeman. Now we have with us in our studios Ms. Lubna Khan Faraz. We're going to be talking about this